Good afternoon. We welcome all virtual and in-person participants and the panelists to the plenary session 2 from Commitment to Action Leadership for Resilient Recovery. We had some fruitful discussions this morning during the technical sessions, which happened in the first half of this day today. My name is Shivangi Chavda. I am Head of Programs at UNDRR and your moderator today. Before we begin, some housekeeping announcements. There are interpretation services in 3 languages, Spanish, French, and English. If you're watching online and you wish to follow the session in one of the 3 UN languages, you can select the preferred language via the interactive program page. Participants in the room are requested to use their headsets that have been provided on your seats. We also encourage the audience to share about this session on social media, #ResilientRecovery. This high-level plenary session does not foresee any interventions from the floor. However, participants are welcome to put the comments in the chat. Let me start by introducing session's objectives today. This plenary session will take stock of leadership commitments and strategic actions at the global, regional, and national levels to ensure the implementation of the priority actions to enhance readiness for resilient recovery. Informed by the insights from the technical sessions that we had, this high-level dialogue will focus on specific commitments, ongoing initiatives, and the next steps required to accelerate recovery readiness. And the last one, we'll try to showcase how governments, financial institutions, international organizations, civil society organizations, and private sectors are taking concrete steps to ensure that these commitments to resilient recovery translate into real-world actions that strengthen recovery readiness at scale. Without further ado, let me introduce briefly our esteemed panelists today. We have with us Mr. Gyeong-Shae Shen, Vice President for Infrastructure, World Bank. We have Mr. Ibrahim Sheikh Diong, Executive Director, Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage. Ms. Rania Sashar, Climate Action Director, International Organization for Migration from IOM. Professor Rajiv Shaw, Graduate School of Media and Governance, Keio University. And Ms. Matina Papathanasiou, Director, Founding Partner at QIC Global Infrastructure. We welcome you all. Let me begin by inviting Mr. Shen with few questions. Given the increasing complexity and scale of recovery needs, how does the World Bank collaborate with other international financial institutions to ensure coordinated, timely, and sustainable financing for post-disaster infrastructure recovery? And what are the concrete commitments of the World Bank to accelerate the implementation of Sendai Framework Priority Action 4? Sir, you have 10 minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Moderator, and good afternoon to you all. Since I represent the World Bank and I cover the infrastructure area, let me focus on your first question, which is really how do we use financing capacity to scale up resilient infrastructure through predictable and timely recovery funding, which are essential for reducing human economic loss post-disaster and get people back to their feet quickly. At the World Bank, we essentially focus on scaling up risk reduction and pre-disaster financial preparedness through a 3-pronged approach. First is really to prioritizing risk reduction and preparedness. Our operation in this field has been evolving. If I compare work that we did, let's say 15, 20 years ago, we actually have changed quite a bit. 15 years ago, maybe we're doing quite a bit of a disaster risk management project focused on post-disaster recovery. But now we're actually shifting more than 50%, actually up to 80% of our disaster financing management project into basically risk reduction, risk preparedness. because the effort to enhance the infrastructure resilience through this kind of a risk assessment will really help countries to prepare themselves in face of the natural disaster that will become more frequent and more intensified. And I think this is very critical for many of the work that we're doing throughout the world. And this is, for example, this is reflected in Rwanda's Vision 2050 in Kigali master plan. It's really focused on this type of preparedness. And second is basically we use, as you know, World Bank, we also host concessional resources for low-income countries. We call the International Development Association contribution. We want to use these limited concessional resources to basically leverage financial market to make large amount of concessional financing predictable. One of the facilities that we created over the last 18 months is called Crisis Preparedness and Response Toolkit. It's basically offer a client country multiple type of financial product that they can access and also use as a pre-range disaster financing. For instance, that the World Bank contingent financing instrument allow government to strengthen their resilient policy, but also to provide rapid access to liquidity at the event of disaster. Today, we have more than 30 countries, but over the life, actually more than 50 countries that benefit from this kind of contingent financing facilities. And for the total amount at the moment, over $4 billion. In Malawi, for example, has tapped this mechanism twice to finance the immediate support for millions of people that are affected by food security crisis in 2024 because of the El Nino, and also after the tropical cyclone of Freddy in 2023. The third pronged approach is really on building government capacities in better management disaster risk financially. Government need capacity to assess this potential shock and manage these potential shocks, and to plan and build capacity. And the work that we're doing on this require emergency capacity, but not only in the Ministry of Finance, but also in the other government agencies responsible for managing their infrastructure and other facilities. So this is our main sort of tools on the financing side. In terms of our support of this Sendai sort of framework, I would say in three areas. One is really already embedded in the financing. It's really integrating this risk reduction, preparedness, and recovery into national planning and local government planning in the system and institution. So for cities, for government, make their planning, this has to be embedded in the basic ingredient of infrastructure and urban planning. And this is, we typically support this through our global facility for disaster risk reduction, the GFDR, which provide grant funding for many of the countries that also cities that we work with. And these have example of, like, for example, some of the city lack basic flood risk data. We help city to develop the capacity to provide those facilities. Second aspect is really on the preparedness and collaboration for easier recovery. In Albania, for example, after 2019 earthquake, we actually work with UNDRR, and also with European Commission to really help them to conduct a rapid damage assessment. So this is one of those facilities. And third is really linking recovery to job creation, and basically so-called the Build Back Better principles. And this is applied to in Mozambique after the cyclone Idai, the program that we developed in terms of post-disaster recovery, and that's we embedded this Build Back Better principle. So these are reflecting a sort of broad shift at the World Bank, seeing resilience not just a risk reduction, but also as a driver for opportunity and to make life better for the country we support. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gyeongshil, for your insights on the financial tools as well as the capacity building and the requirement for embedding the disaster risk reduction in the city planning and others. Thank you so much. With this, let me request Mr. Ibrahim Sheikh to throw his insights or give you his insights on how FRLD ensure that the financial support is provided quickly and efficiently to countries after disasters, And what role do you think FRLD can play in strengthening the global recovery support for climate-related disasters in complementarity with existing financing mechanisms? Floor is yours, sir.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. All right, well, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here and join the conversation with my colleague from the World Bank, but also the rest of the panel members. Let me make 3 important points. One, on the problem we're trying to address and how we see it. The approach in addressing the problem, jointly with all of us combined, but more importantly, what we're doing as a fund to be part of the solution. So as this conversation is taking place, extreme weather conditions are not getting better, they're getting worse. We are dealing with the tropical cyclone in Madagascar, the drought in the Horn of Africa, the flood in Nepal, where I just came from. What all these disasters have in common, there is a human face to disaster. There's recovery and rebuilding to be done to make sure at least these countries, they have so many other challenges, do not have the burden of climate change. There's also a need in making sure that any of these challenges are addressed with government at the forefront so it can be actually sustainable, because it's actually led by the countries themselves, they actually own the solutions. I think the second point I want to make is that the approach has to be a multidimensional approach to the extent that, in my experience, in responding to this type of disaster, there are 2 things that are extremely important. The World Bank talked about the power of early warning system because they do save lives. But once you've gone to the early warning system, the financial response may have to be different forms. I had the experience of working with parametric insurance where we realized actually the limitation of providing insurance to actually provide financial solution to government. So the question is, what are the other instruments that are actually available to government to respond to these type of disasters? Now, whatever response we put on the table, there are 3 words that are important. Is speed, accessibility, and make sure money actually goes to where it's needed the most so we can get actually to the people who need that response. Now, as far as our fund is concerned, we are a great example of what you can do with global solidarity. When this fund was actually launched about 2 years ago, many were actually doubtful we'll get to where we are today. What we're talking about actually providing support to countries who need our support the most. Now, that global solidarity led to having the fund, getting the governance in place, getting pledges being converted into funding, and now we're talking about our early intervention, and that's where I want to focus on. Our board has decided, out of the funding we actually mobilized so far, we've allocated about $250 million to launch our early intervention in supporting countries in the most vulnerable countries. And that will do a couple of things. Number one, we're going to be focusing on rapid response to extreme weather conditions and slow onset. And the underlying word there is rapid. In addressing losses and damages, if support actually comes too late, it may not actually, it defeats the purpose in supporting who needs the most. So I think, number one, our board has decided to focus those resources in those 2 areas that are extremely important in terms of responses. I think second, we're also mindful at this stage, many of the countries, they said not willing to actually borrow to actually address some of these challenges, and that's why our support for the next 2 years will be grant-based support to the countries through budget support so that we can provide the support needed, and always a hope that we can learn more lessons as we diversify other financial instruments. That support also will provide $5 to $20 million per initiative to countries. Obviously, it's not a lot of money, but to a certain degree also can actually add value as long as they're actually targeted in filling the gaps that these countries actually need to respond rapidly to extreme weather conditions and slow onset. Now, that support also is guided by the fact that we are mindful. It's not a one-size-fits-all. It's not a first-come, first-serve. There are countries that are extremely vulnerable, and that's a small island. That's the LDCs. And that's why in our early intervention, we decided to at least allocate a minimum of 50% to those who need support the most, and that's the most vulnerable countries. So as we speak, we are actually working on the modalities with the hope that by COP30, we're actually able to at least reach out to countries and provide the support that's needed. What's important here is whatever support that we're providing has to be nimble, accessible, easier than other access modalities we have in the past. And our fund is very much mindful that we can learn a lot from other initiatives in making sure we focus in providing the support where it's needed. What's important as a message that I want to convey to this audience, there's a human face to climate change. So no matter what we put on the table, as long as we can tell the story that our intervention will save lives and reconstruct in most of these countries, in my view, that should be the focus of our conversation, not separately, but jointly, because all of us, what we provide, combine, and that's how we can be effective in supporting the most vulnerable countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Ibrahim, on throwing light to, and also I think reinforcing the fact that there's a human face for climate change, beautifully put by you, and also about what FRLD is doing currently in terms of speeding and accessibility and efficiency. Thank you so much. Let me now move to Rania, and by asking you this question, how does IOM integrate post-disaster recovery into programming?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for the question, and thank you for the panel. It's actually, when you think of resilience and recovery, it's not only UN or civil society, the combination of financial institutions, loss and damage fund, academia and science, all of us together, I think this is, if it doesn't show a panelist in a session, it shows that resilience and recovery needs solidarity among all partners, among all communities. Saying that, and thank you, Ibrahima, for bringing the human part, let me start by saying a very short story. Before you coming to IOM in Geneva, I was for 28 years working in the field. And I will never forget Miss Amina, who was in one of the countries that's struggling with various multiple crises, conflict, disaster, and severe water scarcity. An old wise lady who told me, we don't need bottle of waters. She's been displaced a number of times because of the various reasons. We don't need bottle of waters. We don't need bag of food. We need solutions. We need to be in our lands. And we need to raise our children in these lands. And I think this story was extremely influential, not only for me, but a number of other people, that people doesn't want to move. But they are obliged to move and obliged to be displaced because of disaster, because of climate, because of other reasons. And our work to support resilience and recovery, not when the disaster happened, but from the readiness, preparedness, early action is extremely important. Evidence and data is clear. We all read the GRID report. 43+ million people has been displaced in 2024 because of the disaster and climate crisis. 393 disaster only in 2024. It's a terrifying number, and I really cannot imagine what will happen because situation is getting worse year after year. And that's why focusing on resilience and recovery, supporting these communities and government is extremely important. As IOM is, as they say in my own country, one hand doesn't clap. It needs a whole of a society approach. So IOM is actually having a holistic approach to support governments when it comes to resilience. We felt that governments need evidence and data. We think that evidence data is accessible for everyone, but no, not all the governments, not all the governments have accessibility to accurate data that support readiness and preparedness and early warning and early action, etc. So we've been supporting and working with the governments on the evidence, on data. What does it mean to increase displacement? What does this mean to the movement of people and how it will implicate on the livelihood of people? But also, we've been working into building the capacity of a number of governments. And I'm so glad that we have academia with us. Actually, lots of the government needs the global knowledge, the global science to come and support on the ground. The normal way of doing recovery and resilience maybe is not working in every culture and context. We need to support with science, with technology. And this is what IOM is trying to do. We're trying to work and support the government on the ground in an operational manner to build risk maps, to look into different capacity building that needed to support the population affected, but give them the awareness that can support an early warning and early action on the ground. It goes without saying that strengthening and building capacity without helping to set the policies that fit for purpose, supporting the government to integrate displaced communities, migrants, affected population within their national plans, within their national WRRR systems will not be enough. So we've been working with the government hand in hand. In Madagascar and Djibouti, for example, supported government to revise their national WRRR strategies, incorporating displacement risks and mobility data within their plans. And this is the way to allow them to support the whole of society approach within their communities. But this is not enough. And we talk about solutions, because solutions is important. And we understood from Ms. Amina years ago that the bottle of water or bag of food or responding to the emergency on the spot is extremely needed, because this is saving lives, but is not enough. Unless we work in a sustainable, scalable solution, this is what really will help the communities and the government. IOM launched last year the Climate Mobility Innovation Lab, which look into using the data and evidence to look into implication of disaster on further displacement, but work hand in hand with academia, with technology, with the communities and the government to have a sustainable, scalable solutions that can help the government and help the communities to sustain a problem like water scarcity in one area or a disaster in certain area, etc., etc. And I think that the government will be is actually not only the government at a national level, but the government at a local level, which is extremely important. I've seen in different countries how municipalities are doing an amazing job, and how at local level government work with the community leaders to raise the awareness, build the capacity, and be part of the solution of the problem. And this is what IOM is also helping the government to do through our operational offices in more than 180 countries across the globe. And can we do that alone? Definitely no. I think the proper DRR, proper resilience is around communication and coordination and collaboration. And this is what we do. We collaborate, we coordinate with civil society, with youth groups, with other UN agencies, as well as NGOs, as well. And this is all of us, how we can support the government in recovery and resilience. Last but not least, we continue to remain committed. It's a big problem. And it cannot be solved it gets solved by a whole of partnership. Have the awareness, support the solution, build the capacities, and the partner and the government to be one of our strategic partners. We are not donors, we are not implementing partners. We are partners in this problem, and we need to put the people who are affected, the human face, but also the government as key partner, where we work hand in hand to support the world's resilience and recovery and the affected populations everywhere. We're committed, and we will continue to do that with all your support. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rania, and thank you for emphasizing the need to create an enabling environment where the community, local government, and the civil society actors really come together to build that resilience. And that is an imperative, I would say, and that is the only way that we can get the solutions. Very nicely put. Thank you so much. Let me now move to Professor Shaw. The questions to you, a couple of them. What is the private sector's role of making to improve recovery readiness? And how will Investors Advisory Board advanced to implement priority actions to enhance readiness. And sorry, I think
Shivangi, I think
have
that's a question to her.
to her. Sorry, I am sorry. It's just question to you, Miss. Sorry. Yeah. Apologies from my side. This happens when your eyes are not working well.
My microphone's not working. Oh, no, it is. Great, fantastic. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'll sort of present from an investor private perspective in particular. And look, it's critical that the private sector is involved, and it's really essential because I think, as we've heard, disasters affect entire communities. And many businesses, and particularly infrastructure assets that are essential, are privately owned, and a whole of system approach, as we've heard, is required, including the community and the private sector collaboration. So where I think the private sector can play a crucial role in both preparing for readiness for disasters and is by providing essential funding and resources for immediate response and also for long-term recovery. And the cost of inaction is substantial. In Australia, where I come from, extreme weather events are expected to cost approximately $35 billion annually in direct costs. And this is a situation that is mirrored globally. So there is a compelling investment case for adaptation and resilience today, rather than paying the projected costs of recovery and suffering the impacts. And obviously there's a lot of personal impacts on people, etc. So the crucial need is to shift from a reactive disaster response approach to a proactive resilience approach, particularly for assets such as infrastructure, which underpin the economy and, essential services for people. But there are challenges for the private sector in implementing this and mitigating the disasters before they occur. And the challenges include coordination with external stakeholders, access and timing of funding, and information sharing gaps. So to address these challenges, Tilt Renewables, which is a company that I'm a director on, in collaboration with QIC, obtained government from the Australian Government Disaster Ready Fund to develop a comprehensive guidebook for the private sector. And the objectives of this guidebook are to identify and mitigate significant natural hazard-related external costs for the private sector, provide evidence-based guidance for resilient investments, embed resilience consideration into investment decisions. That's a really key one. That's something that we don't do a lot of to date in the private sector. And then risk mitigation through targeted investments, actually investing up front. And if I give you a case study that I was involved with at Tilt, we conducted a resilience assessment on a wind farm that we have in Silverton, a remote part of Australia, using the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction scorecard. And the assessment came up with the results. It identified multiple external risks, both impacting the asset and the local community. It highlighted the need for complex solutions and stakeholder collaboration. And it addressed certain risks that were, for assets that impacted our asset, the wind farm, but that there are assets not owned by Tilt Renewables. Then subsequent to that, we actually had a real-life event. There was a very big storm that managed critical transmission infrastructure owned by another party, the grid operator, and that caused extended power outages affecting 20,000 people. And what Tilt did, we responded by, immediately providing generators to the Silverton Township and the local Aboriginal housing community. We committed to supply solar and batteries to an Australian charity that provided 24-hour crisis support. And now we're really focusing our efforts on enabling community power supply for future disasters. So for the private sector to effectively enhance recovery readiness, three critical elements, I think, are required. Collaboration, as we've heard, working with all stakeholders, including all levels of government and the community, to prepare and share resources and findings. and assessing a whole of system issues approach requiring coordinated action. Secondly, we need appropriate tools. So we need to ensure access to proper assessment tools for vulnerability and risk evaluation, implementation and planning, and incorporate this into investment decisions upfront and the way that we operate assets and businesses. And thirdly, we need viable business models. So we need to establish business and investment models that make resilient investment viable and sustainable over the long term. And the second, the Investor Advisory Board, of which I'm a member of, was set up by the UNDRR in response to government calls for greater engagement with the private sector in disaster reduction investment. It was established in May 2023, and its mission is to mobilise private and public investment for disaster prevention and increase societal resilience, and we are developing tools and methodologies to turn investor commitments into action. The IAB is comprised of 10 influential investors, which represent different parts of the financial sector, and we're committed to delivering positive change by leveraging capital markets and the insurance sector. To multiply this impact, we've also engaged with broader finance and community through a consultative group of asset owners that include sovereign wealth funds and pension funds and insurance company. So in this way, we're seeking to mobilise markets and obtain feedback on the proposed solutions. The IAB has worked on a number of solutions and they're published, but I just wanted to touch on one today because I know we're short of time, which is the Resilience Investment Bank. And this is what this is. There's many examples, but it's a specialised financial institution designed to strategically deploy funds to attract and leverage private capital with the primary goal of addressing market failures. And I'm on the board of Housing Australia, and that basically exemplifies this approach in the housing sector. So I wanted to give you a real-life example. So Housing Australia was established by the Commonwealth Government of Australia as part of its response to the housing crisis. And Housing Australia is part of the solution where the government's seeking to build 1.2 million homes, social and affordable homes by 2029. So the governance structure, it's established under legislation, it reports to the minister with a board reporting to the minister, it has a CEO management team, and its real purpose is to improve housing. But what this body does, it transforms policy into programs that enable funding flows from both government and the private sector, and that's key. So if all the programs that Housing Australia has are achieved, we will manage financial and guarantee commitments worth tens of billions of dollars, and in addition there will be significant private capital also invested in housing. One of the key initiatives that I think is innovative and interesting is that the government established the $10 billion Housing Australia Future Fund. So that fund will provide ongoing annual income which can then be used for housing initiatives. The program is expected to support 40,000 homes in coming years. And the way the contracts are structured is quite innovative in that it's a public-private partnership with availability payments, and thereby it also attracts co-investment alongside government money from the private sector. So this program encourages collaboration between developers, builders, community housing providers, local government and eligible homeowners. We also provide blended concessional long-term financing, and we do that both by borrowing directly from the market with sustainable bonds and government funding. So I think what this does, it basically shows that this can be applied to resilient investment. So similar structures and approaches can be applied to demonstrate how the public institutions can leverage private capital for critical infrastructure and community resilience. In terms of the IAB, we'll continue our vital work in attracting capital markets to resilient investment, creating innovative financial mechanisms that will address market failures, and building community and infrastructure resilience against climate-related disasters. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Mettina. And now I move to Professor Shaw. Sorry for that mix-up. All right, so the question to you is, what is the role of academia to enhance resilient recovery? And how will the STAG in Asia-Pacific advance to implement the priority actions to enhance readiness for resilient recovery? Thank you.
Thank you, Sivangi. You know, close to 30 years back when I started my work in disasters, we often used to use the disaster cycle. Like disaster happens, then we have relief rescue, then reconstruction, then recovery, and then go to the preparedness. We still use that colorful circle. I'm not challenging the disaster cycle as per, but I think the situation has evolved beyond that. Why? Because recovery starts from day one after the disasters, in many cases, number one. And number two is preparedness for recovery needs to be part of the initial pre-disaster risk assessment. I mean, these are actually the two conclusions I mainly wanted to convey in my talk, but let me a little bit elaborate on that. You know, communities are always diverse, and each community has its own needs and priorities. Some of the communities, they will be waiting for others to help, but some of the communities from day one, immediately after the disasters, they start their own process of recovery and reconstruction. So in Japan, we often call about 3 types of help: self-help by myself, mutual help with the community, and public help, which is with the government. These are all 3 very, very important help. But from my own experience working in different parts of Asia, I think self-help, mutual help, public help, there is an additional help which is the network help, which actually brings different types of resources, be it technical resource, be it financial resource, be it different types of knowledge resource and so on. So combination of that is very, very important. I give you 2 examples, again from Japan. Back in 2018, we had a major flooding in western part of Japan, and that was in July. So immediately, and around 52 people lost their lives. When the rain stopped, the next day, the temperature went up to 37 degrees. And this particular area is a very highly aging population. So when people went to clean their houses and all these things, they were exposed to heat. So this post-disaster heat has a huge impact, and there were lots of secondary deaths, which are not directly related to the flood, but the thing which happened after the disaster. Last year, Kamal in the morning, SRSG, he talked about the one major earthquake and tsunami of 2024 in Noto Peninsula. And that area is, again, it's a opposite one. It was very cold, almost 2 meters of snow in some areas. And after the disaster, there was no water, electricity, road accessibility, sanitation problem, and this very, very cold weather. So there were around 504 people lost their lives, but out of them, 276 people were secondary death. So we could have saved their lives, but they actually died in the evacuation center or some in the temporary housing. So why I'm telling this one, that we need to change our concept that the disaster recovery starts immediately after the disaster, depending on the local situation and the local context. And this complexity of the disasters which we are seeing, whether it is the climate extreme, whether it is other geopolitical context, I think that's becoming also quite a major challenge. In the call for action from this particular conference, I think the recovery readiness is one of the key words. And I strongly in support of that. In academia, we try to develop lots of risk assessment tools. If you just Google risk assessment tools, there are thousands of that. But very few risk assessment tools are actually incorporating the recovery readiness framework or recovery readiness indicator. I consider that one of the failure in our side, from the academia side, and that's definitely something which we need to improve, that how we actually incorporate that. So to understand the recent gaps in this whole recovery process, in my group in Keio University, we have tried to do some bibliometric analysis of around 7,600 publications. Try to understand where science is there in the recovery, disaster recovery. Out of that, 775 papers we used for the statistical analysis, and 78 cases we went into the in-depth actual analysis. So because all recoveries are different, and it's very, very difficult to actually generalize something. We are getting some 4 very specific points which I'd like to highlight. Number one is that we try to see that most of the disaster research from the academia side are considered into 3 major clusters. One is some technology for the monitoring of different types of recovery process. Then definitely community recovery, which is a very positive side. There have been lots of research on the community recovery. And the third one is also very encouraging, is the institutional resilience. Institutional resilience at different level, be it in the community, be it in the local government, be it in the national government. So that's the first part. The second part is, up to 2017, I still have to actually see find the reason why up to 2017. There has been lots of work which has been done on the engineering aspect of the recovery, the economic losses and all these things. But post 2017, we have been seeing a major shift to social, ecological, and institutional framework in the recovery process. And that's again, in the research part, I think that's a very new trend which is coming up. The third one is 2 specific terminologies coming very strongly. One is transformative recovery. In the morning also, again, Kamal, the SRSG has pointed out that nowadays recovery is not just, okay, I have this damage and I will again build the same thing like that. We need to see the context, and depending on the context, we need to transform the process. So this transformative recovery, depending on the local condition, is a very, very important aspect. And another one is that during the recovery time, the adaptive governance is extremely, extremely important, because the rules, regulations are there, but we need certain amount of flexibility to cope with the local conditions. And the fourth point here in this particular analysis, what we are finding, that little bit longer term monitoring, recovery monitoring is lacking. Yes, we do 5 years, maybe maximum 10 years of recovery monitoring. But we always say, like this year in Kobe, the Hanshin-Awaji earthquake, this is the 30th year, and we often say that Kobe is still recovering. Because it's not just the physical part of it, there are lots of complex issues and the new issues which are emerging. So how we see the recovery in a more longer term perspective is a very, very important thing. And for a government, I think it's very difficult, because they have lots of other priorities. And that's where I see the role of academia comes in, where we can do lots of important research into this longer-term recovery. Regarding your second question on the AP STAG, Asia Pacific Science Technology Advisory Group, which I chair, we have 2 specific things which are very close to the recovery. Number one is we are now promoting this concept of DRR Innovation Hub. In some of the universities in the Asia Pacific. We have China, we have Japan, we have Singapore, we have India, and we have the University of California system. And there we are trying to link with science, society, and industry co-creation. So it's more the science, private sector, and the societal problem. So very specific to the recovery, there are always major challenge on water sector, energy sector, sanitation, like the toilet. Toilet becomes one of the major challenge, how you can make more affordable, portable toilets after the disaster. I think that's a very, very important part, and we have seen it in many cases. So these are some of the work which you are doing, but I would also like to highlight that it's not just the product always which matters. The process innovation or the social innovation in the local community. And that's the work which we are doing in the Asia Pacific Science Technology Advisory Group. And my last point is, we are working with the UNDRR Bangkok office, what we call the, and you mentioned about that one, that working with the science or academia stakeholder, that we try to strengthen the science capacities in smaller countries. Of course, the big countries, they have lots of good capacities. Specifically, I mentioned Laos, Cambodia, Sri Lanka, Bhutan, Mongolia, and East Timor. These are the 6-7 countries where we are working, and they are possibly this recovery readiness framework at the national level. How we can actually work with this local government from the AP stack side, will be very much committed to bring it forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Shaw, on letting us know that recovery readiness framework is relevant and is needed. And your exemplary work on the research itself is like kind of lesson for us today. We are still with the time, and I'll give floor to all of you, in fact, to give your key takeaway from this intervention and what key commitment can you make for readiness response recovery, starting from Mr. Ibrahim.
Well, I mean, I think if there's one takeaway from this conversation, is the holistic nature of the response. I hear a lot of conversation about planning, preparation, which some of the institutions here on the panel certainly play a major role that we can leverage and adapt to the needs of the country we're trying to support. But I think the response is going to be a multi-form response whereby the financial instrument come from different sources. And I think as far as we're concerned, we certainly want to add to those financial instruments so that you can address different risk layers and respond to the countries. And again, it goes back to the point I made time and time again. In the case of extreme weather conditions, a rapid response is extremely important, but it also has to be adequate enough to get to where the needs is. So I think the first message I want to get across, that holistic nature of the response. I think second, we had a very powerful high-level dialogue in Washington, D.C. on the responses and enhancing losses and damage in the most vulnerable countries. And one thing that came out from the conversation is the power of partnership. Not one institution alone can do this. And I hope, in addition to this conversation, we can identify opportunity to provide the partnership where we don't actually duplicate our efforts on the ground, as long as the country is on the driver's seat. Certainly, what we provide from our different institutions can be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And I think the last point I wanted to put on the table, in our case, we got kind of voluntary contribution up to $766 million, but the needs are in the billions. And so therefore, we have to have an innovative way of mobilizing resources. The replenishment as we know it is almost gone because of the changing landscape. So the role of philanthropy, the role of private sector, the role of other players is going to be extremely important so we can mobilize the billions that we need. So funds like us will be highly capitalized so we can anticipate on the need of the countries. And last point I just want to make, and I want to recognize the role of the indigenous communities, the NGOs, the CSO, they play a major role for our fund to see the day. And I think as we implement our intervention across the most vulnerable countries, it is important they're part of the solution because they know the communities, they have the credibility and the track record. It is in our best interest to leverage this knowledge so we can be effective in our response to losses and damage.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ibrahim. Ms. Martina, what is your key takeaway?
My key takeaway is that it's given the enormous task that we have in funding resilience, it's critical that the private sector play a role. It's imperative. And in doing that, what we need to also move to is collaborating, as we've heard, but we need to have a proactive resilience response up front, and we need to include resilience planning in the business case for developing new assets in particular. There's a huge energy transition going on in the world, and we're spending an enormous amount of money, with new assets also. Everything that we do new needs to be basically done on a resilient basis. But the other key part of this is we need to develop business models that support investment decisions. And so that's where you need to have financial tools, instruments and structures which basically involve the government and the private sector collaborating together in some financing structure. So that's my key takeaway.
Thank you so much, Ms. Martina. Mr. Yongshan.
Perhaps I would highlight one thing that may embed with this example of how to integrate the sort of policy making and financing, because there are two key elements of breaking these so-called cycles, right? And I think one product that the World Bank has developed 18 years ago, started in Central America, is called catastrophic deferred drawdown, which is basically is a policy-based lending. You could think of it as a standby credit. We discussed with the government, develop a national policy on disaster risk management, embedded all the principles that we discuss here. On that basis, then we provide a line of credit to that authority. So in case of a national disaster happens, that they then make the declaration and then immediately make that credit line available. We started with low-income countries, and now we expanded to middle-income countries. On that, to expand the facility, we obviously need partnership. In fact, we look forward to see whether we can partner with Loss and Fund, making that possible for country to reduce the financing cost of the facility. And this is something that many countries has actually taken on. We started in Central America, as I mentioned, from 18 years ago. We now have over 50 countries that actually embrace their facility. And I see this is one thing that we continue to market and continue to work with the country, because that embedded many of the principles that we discuss here, and also the partnership with the private sector and other facilities as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shin. Rainer.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the great examples from colleagues across the panel. Actually, one important takeaway is that resilience recovery is only possible with good governance. Good governance in readiness during disaster and after disaster. And we heard an amazing examples from private sector, from financial institution, World Bank and loss and damage, from academia, from myself. And actually, this good governance will not happen on its own, because unless we tailor solutions that contextualize, respect context and culture, respect the kind of disaster within every government, and be able, through localized actions, through different agencies, whether UN, whether NGOs, whether civil society, to work with the government on system strengthening, ensuring inclusive policies that can see also the displacement risk and migration risk, etc. Supporting the government to access funding, like loss and damage fund, and build their capacity to manage this fund. Unless we all use the technology from private sectors, the science from academia, etc., we will not be able to reach there. So for me, good governance is not only one agency working in building capacity, but it's a tailored solution that brings all these amazing tools and amazing factors and amazing partners together to help these governments to ensure resilience, recovery, and the readiness to support their communities. We're committed to continue doing that and bring that to the countries, and we're looking forward to coordinate and collaborate with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rania. Professor Shaw, Wangiti.
Yes, my esteemed colleagues have already pointed out very, very important things. I have two very simple things. Number one is, as I mentioned, that the recovery needs to be personalized. It's not a generic one solution fits for all. We need to identify the diversity in the society, and we need to possibly try to make the recovery plan which fits to that particular diversity. Number two is, we had enough of calls, but now it's time for commitment. So I think instead of call for actions, I think it's our own commitments. What I can commit in this hall is, with my small role as the chair of the Science Technology Advisory Group in the Asia Pacific region, or in my role as an academia in one of the universities in Japan. And I will be committed to that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Shaw. Let me now invite Mr. Abhilash Panda, a Deputy Chief of Intergovernmental Processes, Interagency Coordination and Partnerships, UNDRR, to the stage, please, to present the Recovery Readiness Assessment Framework and rollout plans. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I basically have 5 minutes, but before that, can I thank all in the panel here for joining us. What you left us with is what we want to take up to the next stage. the slides will be popping up in a few seconds, but before we close this plenary and we go to the closing ceremony of the First World Resilient Recovery Conference, where you will hear about the priority actions, it was necessary for us to give you a bit of a segue what happens next, because we don't want you to leave and everyone to leave from here without not knowing what happens next. Was it just a conference in itself, or there is more to it? The priority call to actions that you saw a glimpse of it in the morning, you will be hearing more during the closing, is built on has a genesis of a few years now. And to that is a few governments, or at least a group of vulnerable countries, member states, in a particular conversation conveyed to us and to a larger community of international partners that we are constantly in a boxing ring. In the past, where there used to be 1 in a 100-year event, 1 in a 20-year event, now having events 3 or 4 times in a year. So let's not talk about Build Back Better, because I don't have that kind of time. By the time I am able to respond to one event and start the recovery process, or even think of reconstruction, or maybe think of Building Back Better, I am reacting to another event in itself. So I don't have the capacity, the timeline, the bandwidth of it. And then to add to it, you have issues around financing, capability, so on and so forth. And basically they left that room telling us, you guys need to come together and look at a completely different way of doing recovery and conveying recovery needs in itself. So back to the drawing board, we did not want to make things complicated, but we wanted to go back to the basics. What exactly needs to be done differently? And I think Professor Shaw mentioned about it, Ibrahim from FRLD and others mentioned about it. Governments are at the driving seat, but that does not mean they are going to do everything by themselves. They need the coordinated effort of not just the international community, but the national actors and other ministries in itself. Now, based on 3-4 years of work, backed by country case studies, a lot of research, discussions with member states, we think we have something that can now go to countries to start assisting them in understanding what does it mean by having readiness for resilient recovery. Very simple instances. There could be a fund. A fund could be providing financial resources to a country to address loss and damages. But does the country have the right instruments to absorb that fund, to deploy that fund, to implement that fund? It's a difficult question. And we need to find answers to that. Are there grievance redressal mechanisms in a country where these things can be discussed? Maybe not. We haven't actually come across many per se. We talk a lot about addressing the protection gap, but it's again something that needs to be done from a regulatory perspective. Has that been discussed? Is there a difference between responding to an event versus doing recovery? Because mostly for governments, if they can reduce the impact, the recovery timeline also shifts. I think, Ibrahim, you mentioned about rapid. So it's a portion of that, but also looking at it from a perspective of what needs to be done beforehand. To add a few more instances to it, what we came out with is, for instances, government do not see, to a large extent, that we just need to wait for large events to do recovery exercises. We need to practice even small events, because that builds the capacity and momentum of the entire apparatus that's in a country to do it. So that's what the readiness framework has consultatively come out in itself. Where do we go from here? The International Recovery Platform, which is a consortium of multiple agencies, a lot in this room, some of them are not here, as a next step is going to work with member states to look at where exactly the gaps are. The intention here is not to redo the entire exercise, but if we can identify what the specific bottleneck is in a country, which prevents either making the recovery faster, inclusive, and efficient, that's where needs to be addressed, whether it be from a contingent financing perspective, whether that needs to be a recovery framework, which a country does not have, or is it establishing emergency operation centers which could radically shift the way loss and damage or losses are currently addressed or damages could be reduced. So we wanted to leave you with that. This is not an end product. This is not the end of the line, but this is a process that's going to expand gradually to assist member states working with the various partners, both at national level, community level, but also at international level. So thank you very much, Shivangi, and back to you.
Thank you, Abhilash. And thank you all the participants and esteemed panelists for such an enriching discussions and dialogue. Thank you so much. And we now, the closing session will start now. Thank you all.